Over the past couple of years, I've reviewed a total of 5 anamorphic lenses on this channel, all of them budget friendly. Of those, 2 of them were for full frame sensors, and one of those was a Greatjoy anamorphic lens. So this is the second one from them that I've ever reviewed, and let me just say that this one is much better than the first one. This is the new 50mm T2.9 1.8X. Let's start by seeing what this lens is capable of. Okay, when I say that this lens is better than the original 60mm that I reviewed about 6 months ago, that is a fact. If you guys remember, that original lens was a 1.33x anamorphic, which is not much of a squeeze, and then it had a 1.35x magnification adapter that made the whole setup ridiculously long, heavy, and a challenge to use. This new 50mm is significantly smaller, way better built, and produces better results. The lens that I got is for Sony E-mount, although they are selling basically every mount on the market at the moment, so if you have a camera, you can use this lens on it in one form or another. There is a metal mount here, no electronic connections, all manual, nice and smooth T-stop ring, which is etch printed on either side, a quarter mount adapter to attach to a tripod, and a singular yellow line around it make for a nice little design feature. The focus ring is here. It gives you about 270 degrees of rotation to dial in focus. It is super light, very little to no resistance, so making quick focus changes is easy. It's marked with a cutout on one side and a window cutout on the other side. But the markings are only in meters, so that might be a challenge if you aren't used to it. Toward the very front, there is a nice and large etched 50mm here, so you know what this lens is, and on the other side is a Greatjoy logo done in their signature yellow. Around the front, some printing so you don't forget what this lens is, and a square front element that has some bluish reflective hues. On a camera such as my A7C, it's quite a lens. It's long, it's very front heavy, it's just heavy in general, coming in at 1,076 grams, which is almost 2.5 pounds. Inside there are 16 elements in 12 groups and an 11 blade diaphragm. Front filter thread is 82mm. Now this is a 50mm 1.8x anamorphic, so up and down it gives you a regular 50mm field of view on a full frame camera, but once you de-squeeze the footage, the horizontal field of view is more like a 28mm lens, so it's a very versatile focal length. And the 1.8x is a standout feature of this lens, as competitors from Siri and Laowa have either 1.6x or 1.5x stretches, which is noticeably less. So if you love the oval bokeh look, this Greatjoy beats the competition in that regard. And this is a modern lens. Now, it's not a remake of a classic anamorphic lens. A lot of those back in the day had a ton of distortion issues and you couldn't correct a lot of it. So it's not like a classic anamorphic lens, which is a good thing, maybe a bad thing if you're looking for character. That's kind of the weird thing about reviewing anamorphic lenses in general, is that you kind of have to look at everything backwards. things like flaring and distortions that are normally not good are considered good when it comes to anamorphic lenses. All right, let's talk about optics. It's a nicely sharp lens. I left it wide open at T2.9 for all of my samples and it was sharp. Most folks shooting with anamorphic lenses don't care at all about sharpness, but it's good that in this example it is sharp. Stopping down to T4 sharpens everything up even more, but you do sacrifice out of focus backgrounds. Now with anamorphics, there are three areas that are important. Number one is the squeeze, number two is bokeh, and number three is flare. The squeeze factor is 1.8x. However, you'll notice here that if you use the full 1.8x image, it is very wide with very little vertical information. So most of the time I cropped in a little bit to get to that 2.35:1 ratio or so, which is nice because you can adjust framing a little bit if you need to. Also, as you'll notice on a full frame sensor, there is some vignetting that can get heavy. Cropping in gets rid of that obviously, and while I'm talking about the frame with this lens, it has some strange distortions. Barrel distortion horizontally, which is pretty normal, but it also has vertical pincushion distortion if you pay close attention to it. Now, normally I would complain about this sort of stuff, but again, with anamorphic lenses, you have to think backwards. The other thing to know about the squeeze factor is that it is not consistent through the focus range. So if you have a subject at minimum focus, the squeeze factor drops to about 1.68x, and then beyond 2 meters, it's more like 1.75x, and then over to 1.8. This is a little more annoying as you can't apply the same de-squeeze settings to all of your clips, and you have to go in and adjust them individually and perhaps cut them and edit portions if you are racking the focus from one end to another. And while I'm on the topic, can we please get a 1.8x de-squeeze option in Adobe Premiere Pro? I mean, it's 2022. You have 1.5x, you have 1.45, you have 2.0, but you don't have anything in between 1.5 and 2.0, and there's no way to custom de-squeeze to 1.8, unfortunately. So for all of my samples, I had to de-squeeze at either 1.5 or at 2.0. and then just mix and match. So in terms of squeeze factor, this lens gets a thumbs up. Second, in the area of bokeh, this lens has a nice shape, more oblong than the other anamorphic lenses that I've reviewed, but you have to realize that this is a pretty wide lens, so don't expect the bokeh to be huge. But I am excited about this because Greatjoy is releasing an 85mm in addition to a 35mm anamorphic lens as sort of an accompaniment to this 50mm, and I think that that 85mm is going to be a bokeh master if you love oval bokeh. That being said, this 50mm is not bad. It still does create some nice smooth bokeh, and there are no real issues with it in terms of texture or outlining. So another thumbs up there. Lastly, flare. Now you guys know that anamorphic lenses are all about crazy blue lines across the frame. The last series lens that I reviewed for full frame took this a little too far, I think, as it creates a super distracting flare off of any light in the scene. The last Greatjoy lens that I reviewed had very little flare, and it was warm, not blue. This lens is somewhere just in the middle with more blue flare, but not too much. And I like the balance. You don't flare everything. There are moments where I thought it would flare and it didn't, but when you have the sun or when you have some bright headlights, it flares nicely. And again, it doesn't overtake the frame, which is a good thing in my opinion. But that is subject to your preferences. My old cameraman who is helping me with the shooting of the motorcycle owns the series full frame and prefers the greater amount of flare that it produces. I personally like this little more subdued look. The last thing that I'll say about this lens is that my copy had a little bit of an issue with the focus ring. So it's smooth in one direction, but when you go back to trying to focus at minimum, once you get past about 1.8 meters and then all the way over to 0.7, it gets a little bit more frictiony, kind of more resistance. Now it smooths out when you do this a lot, and it's perfect in either direction, but then once you don't use it for a while, it seems to get a little bit more sticky or frictiony. I asked Greatjoy about this and they said that this is normal and it should loosen up over time, and it has gotten better since the first time that I used this lens, so just something to be aware of. Might just be my copy, but if you guys buy one of these lenses and experience the same thing, it's normal. And it's certainly not a deal breaker. I think from a build quality standpoint, this lens is amazing and a step up over the first model that I reviewed. Now, as far as price, this lens is currently on Indiegogo. They have a campaign that's running for another 4 or 5 days, I think. So definitely check that out down in the description below if you are looking for a budget anamorphic lens and you like the style that this thing produces. Joining the campaign, I think you save about $200 from the normal retail price. That being said, anamorphic lenses are insanely expensive. If you guys have researched them in the past, you'll know that they can get up there to $30,000, even $60,000 US, which is crazy. This still represents an amazing value even if you pay full retail for it. To get a 50mm T2.9 anamorphic that covers a full frame sensor with a 1.8X squeeze is a pretty remarkable thing. That is it for my review of this lens. I hope you guys enjoyed it and you learned something. Leave some comments down below of your thoughts about anamorphic lenses, whether you like this thing or whether you prefer more flare or whether you prefer a different color flare. What do you guys think about these budget anamorphic lenses? As always, thank you so much for all of your likes, all of your comments, and your support. Stay tuned for more videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.